Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Missing Link in Your Healing, the podcast where we bring you the things that you might not know are required for your healing, the missing links. We give you a holistic perspective on health, and we offer you insights, tools, and techniques so that you can create the vibrant health that you would love. So we've had a few episodes where we've spoken about certain organs or certain systems. We had one on the heart, we had one on the pancreas, and today we're going to talk about the gut. Now, there is so much information about gut health out there that I know that some of what I'm going to tell you, you absolutely will have heard before. But what I'm going to do is bring it together for you, bring the physical together with the organ energetics, the sort of more emotional, the sort of psychological, and the energetic perspective. And then we're going to talk about one or two conditions associated with the gut and what their underlying unconscious causes maybe, or what kind of patterns can lead to those disorders. So the first thing is we just need to talk about the gut a bit, right? So I'm going to try and not to get too technical about this, but I do think that it's important that we see what an important organ the gut is. So I remember when I was at university, which wasn't a million years ago, but it was a long time ago, the gut was really, it was treated like a muscular tube, a tube for digestion. And since then, there's been a lot of research into gut and gut function and the gut microbiome and the enteric nervous system and all the things that we're going to talk about today. And in a nutshell, your gut is essentially central to your overall well-being. Now, I want to just say at this point that lots of sort of natural medicine pundits and health gurus, it's all about the gut. No matter what's wrong with you, we've got to fix your gut. And while I'm not entirely opposed to that, I do also want to say that you have a number of other organs and that your gut can be affected by the health of other parts of you. And so it sometimes isn't only the gut, although there's no denying that the gut is really, really important. So what does your gut do? Well, your gut absorbs nutrients. It trains your immune system to recognize a friend or foe. It helps to regulate inflammation. And this is really important because chronic inflammation is the foundation of most of our chronic lifestyle diseases. So heart disease, diabetes, certain types of cancer, autoimmune disease, they all have chronic inflammation as their underpinning, as their foundation. And the gut helps to regulate inflammation. It also houses trillions of microbes known as your gut biome that directly affect your physical and importantly also your mental health. So firstly, let's just talk about the gut-brain axis. So your gut and your brain are constantly in two-way communication, and this happens via a nerve called your vagus nerve. It's part of your autonomic nervous system, immune signaling, and hormones. So this means that stress, mood, thoughts can actually alter our digestion. While the gut imbalances, when the gut is imbalanced, when you've got imbalanced function in your gut, can affect our mental clarity, our mood, and even our behavior. So the second part that we want to talk about is the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is really all the bacteria, the viruses, the fungi, all the microbes that live in your gut. And your gut microbiome literally acts as an organ all on its own, right? And it's housed inside your gut. So you have a diversity of organisms. The more diverse your gut microbiome is, the more species of organisms you have, generally, the more protective it is. So it supports resilience, immunity, and metabolic balance. Whereas if you have an imbalance in your gut microbiome, so this is called gut dysbiosis. When you have dysbiosis, that means you have too many harmful bacteria, and this can actually drive inflammation. It can drive leaky gut syndrome, allergies, autoimmunity. It can affect obesity, and even some it has cardiovascular effects also. So what does your gut do? Well, it does a few things. One of the things it does is it produces nutrients, and quite a few actually. So your gut produces vitamin B12 and vitamin K2, which are important for your immune cell health. It also produces short-chain fatty acids, which strengthen your gut lining, and they promote the regulatory T cells, which help to regulate your inflammatory processes. They calm down your overactive immunity. They also they reduce inflammatory agents like cytokines. They fuel your colon cells, right? And they keep your intestinal barrier intact. So this is really important. This is all the things that the short chain fatty acids do. And the short chain fatty acids are produced when your gut microbes ferment dietary fiber. Then you also have things called tryptophan metabolites. Now, tryptophan is an essential amino acid. You find it in dairy, in turkey, in eggs, in legumes, and in nuts and seeds. And the gut microbes actually convert the tryptophan into these chemical reagents which balance your pro and your anti-inflammatory responses. It also helps to modulate serotonin. So serotonin is one of the mood stabilizing chemicals. So when we take mood stabilizing medication, they're very often serotonin uptake inhibitors. Serotonin helps to keep our mood stable. And 90% of your serotonin is actually produced in your gut. It's not produced in your brain, it's produced in the gut. So your gut health will determine how healthy your serotonin production is, and your serotonin production is going to affect not only your physical health, but it's going to more importantly affect your mental health as well. Then you also have bile acid derivatives. So what happens is that the microbes, they change bile acids into something called a secondary bile acid, and that acts as a signaling molecule for immune cells, and it affects inflammation and antimicrobial defense. So it helps our immunity. They also produce things called polyamines, which support cell growth. They regulate and they stabilize our DNA, and they regulate our immune response. I think you're getting the picture, right? There's like an immune thread that runs through this. And then you have things called lipopolysaccharides and peptidoglycans, which also, they are components of bacterial cell walls, and they interact with immune receptors. So basically, they train your immune system to know what is the stuff that we want and what is the stuff that we don't want. So our immune system gets trained to recognize threats. So when we have gut dysbiosis, obviously this can trigger chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation ends up looking like a huge number of different diseases. So our microbiome is continuously educating and fine-tuning our immune system. When we have the right balance, then our immunity is strong but calm, so it's not overreactive. And when we have an imbalance, then we end up having chronic inflammation, we have autoimmunity, and we have a weakness generally in our immune system. Now, in the wall of the gut, you also have an entire nervous system called your enteric nervous system. So not only does your brain communicate with your gut via your vagus and hormones, and in other signaling chemicals, but you actually have an entire nervous system in your gut wall. It's called your enteric nervous system, or the ENS, right? And it's a network of neurons embedded in the lining of your gut, which goes all the way from your esophagus down to your rectum. And there's between 100 and 500 million neurons in your enteric nervous system, which is more than you have in your spinal cord. So in Chinese medicine, they call the large intestine, or the intestine, the gut, they call it the thinking brain, the feeling brain, sorry. So the thinking brain is the brain that you have in your cranium, and the feeling brain is the one that you have in your gut. And science has now shown that that is 100% correct. So your enteric nervous system communicates with your central nervous system via your vagus nerve, as well as through your autonomic nervous system, through your parasympathetic and sympathetic fibers. But it can also function independently. And one of its independent functions is it controls the motility, how well your intestine contracts. And so it regulates peristalsis, and it produces enzymes, and it regulates blood flow, and it affects absorption. So this all happens independently. You don't have to have a signal from your brain to do this. This happens independently via your enteric nervous system. It actually operates as its own agent. And there are two main plexuses. One is in the muscular layer. It's called the myenteric plexus. That's the one that's involved with motility and contractility. It basically moves the waste products down so that we can eliminate them. And then you have a submucosal plexus, which is beneath the gut lining. And this one regulates the secretions, the absorption, and blood flow. So it's really wild that all of this is happening inside this tube, this thing that we thought was just a tube. Your enteric nervous system is also associated with your gut brain, right? It's called your gut brain because it uses the same neurotransmitters as your brain does. So dopamine, serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine, and the rest. 90 to 95% of the serotonin, as I mentioned earlier, is made in your gut. And this influences our mood, it influences our memory, it influences our mental health, and it can actually influence our behavior. So your enteric nervous system also communicates with your immune and your endocrine system. And it does this with, it signals, it produces signals that helps to shape your immune response. So also in the wall of your gut, you have an organ, it's literally an organ called gut associated lymphatic tissue. So it's a lymphatic layer in the wall, and it interacts with this GALT essentially is like the border patrol of your gut. This is the defense line that goes, no, 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 these are aliens. We don't want this one coming in. This is something good. We can let this come through the wall. This needs to stay in the intestine and it needs to actually be eliminated. So that's how your gut does. And it does that. And in doing that, it also signals and shapes your immune response. So it interacts with certain hormones like ghrelin and leptin. Those are associated with appetite control, and cortisol, which is a hormone associated with stress. So it in effect affects our metabolism. Depending on how well our gut's operating, will have an effect on our metabolism. And the gut microbiome, right, and the tissues in your gut are affected by what is present in your gut, obviously. So the food you eat is going to affect it. Drugs definitely affect your gut biome, all right? Hormones have a marked effect on your gut biome. And one of the reasons why women start getting more prone to belly fat and weight gain when they start going through perimenopause and menopause is because the alterations in hormones alter the gut biome also. Fascinating. I mean, I think that's amazing. Um, your enteric nervous system determines to a large extent how well you digest. And when your enteric nervous system is imbalanced, it's implicated in diseases like irritable bowel syndrome, chronic constipation and diarrhea, right? Mental health issues like anxiety, depression, brain fog, immune issues, because your gut barrier is maintained via your enteric nervous system and your GALT. And essentially, it helps to regulate inflammation. So the truth is that your gut really is essential for whole body balance. I just don't want us to lose sight of the fact that it is not the beginning and ending of everything. So you can do all the right things for your gut. You can be eating the food, you can be taking the supplements, you can be doing the ferments, you can be whatever it is that you think you need to be doing. And you may still have health issues, even though you've cleared up your gut, because it's not the only organ, right? And so, unfortunately, we have a tendency to reductionist thinking. So even in sort of complementary medicine circles, we go, oh, well, the gut's this amazing organ. Yes, it is the amazing organ, but it's not the only organ, right? There's lots of other things going on in there. Okay. So just don't lose sight of that. Okay. And in the same way in which when your gut is healthy, it can, or when your gut's when your gut's healthy, it can affect your mental health. When your gut's unhealthy, it can also affect your mental health. So very often what I also see is, okay, we have two things. Either people completely bypass the emotional, energetic, and the sort of unconscious, and they focus only on the physical. Or when they don't want to focus on the physical, they neglect the physical and they go straight for the sort of mental, emotional, energetic. All right. So, we go to the energy healer, but our diet is, we don't eat any whole foods. We eat lots of processed foods. No shame if you're eating processed foods. It's just the reality. All right. So it's important that we don't bypass any system. All right. That's what holism means. Holistic health means we look at everything. So we don't negate the physical, but we don't make it the most important. We don't negate the emotional. We also don't make it the most important. We realize that all these aspects are operating together. So let's look at the organ energetics. I'm only going to talk, so your gut actually stretches from your esophagus all the way down to your rectum, but I'm actually only going to talk about your small intestine and your large intestine. Otherwise, this podcast is going to go on forever, right? So in Jyutsu, which is a traditional Japanese healing art, for those of you who haven't watched any or listened to any of our podcasts, the large intestine is coupled with the lung. And it's exactly the same in traditional Chinese medicine. The lung and the large intestine are coupled organs. Now, physiologically, your lung and large intestine, the lining, the cells that line the lung and the large intestine are very similar, and they come from the same embryonic origin. Your lung expels waste gases and your large intestine expels food waste. So they are organs of expulsion and absorption. So your lung absorbs oxygen, water and other nutrients are absorbed through your gut wall into your bloodstream. So they are organs of assimilation and expulsion. So that's why they are coupled. All right. So did I just say your lung and large intestine? Yes, sorry. I segued into your lung and large intestine, but I actually want to speak about your small intestine first. Okay, so I'm going to go back. So just backtrack. All right. I'll come back to the lung and the large intestine. So the small intestine is coupled with the heart. Now, in one of the previous episodes, we spoke about heart. the heart and what the function is of the heart energetically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and so on, and physically. And the small intestine and the heart are coupled organs. Now, you might go, how are they even remotely related? Well, the heart receives blood, different types of blood, oxygenated, deoxygenated. It goes into different chambers. It's like a sorting station, and then it gets pumped to different areas of the body, right? So the blood, the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the tissues. It goes, then sends that to the lungs so that it can get oxygenated. And then when it comes back, it sends the oxygenated blood back to the cells. So it's like a sorting chamber, okay? Whereas your small intestine, it receives food, different foods, and it breaks down different foods along different parts of the small intestine and absorbs different foods along different parts. So another kind of sorting station. So the element that governs the heart and small intestine is the fire element, and the emotion, according to Jyutsu, is pretense or trying to. So this is where we don't connect to our heart. We only connect to our head. We intellectualize and we rationalize our emotions, and we make everything okay. And we have this sort of false positivity, all right? So we pretend. We have this sort of like Facebook, the curated life, right? That's the part that we show, right? So it's the masks that we put on. That's the trying to, the pretending. And the trying to is when we're constantly comparing and competing, and we're constantly having to be better. If I just try harder, if I'm just more clever, if I was just thinner, if I was just richer, all right? That is the attitude that's associated with the small intestine and the heart organ function energy. And the tissue, according to Jyutsu, is the bone. So it's really important for us to have this function be harmonized so that we can have a strong foundation. Our skeletal structure is literally our foundation. And the small intestine governs assimilation. It governs assimilation and separation. So it decides what are we going to absorb and what are we not going to absorb. What's discarded? What do we keep and what do we eliminate? It supports the heart function because they're coupled, so it affects our circulation, and it also affects the clarity of our autonomic nervous system. So it helps us to regulate whether we need to be more active, as in more sympathetically on, or we need to be more sort of resting and digesting, parasympathetic nervous system turned on. And emotionally, it is associated with discernment and clarity. What is right for me? So in the same way in which our small intestine decides, is this a nutrient? Do we want to absorb this or do we want to discard this? Emotionally and mentally, our small intestine organ function energy enables us to discern what is good for us or not. What are we going to absorb? What content are we going to listen to? What literature are we going to read? What people are we going to hang out with? What environments do we put ourselves into? It allows us to become more discerning in terms of what it is that we need for our optimal health and happiness. When it's imbalanced, we become confused. We overthink. We analyze, we overthink, and we overanalyze, and we go down that rabbit hole, and we end up with that whole analysis paralysis, where we become so confused. We can also become hypersensitive. Everything triggers us when there's an imbalance in the small intestine organ function energy. And we often have a false positivity. We put on a false, you're always okay. You're always fantastic. You're always amazing, even if, things are absolutely dire. We struggle. We hustle. We've got to go harder, right? We've got to push, and we compare and compete when we have the imbalances. And so when it's in harmony, our perception is clear and we trust in our inner knowing. We can connect to the truth of our hearts. We're not bound by our intellect. We bring the head and the heart function together. So of course, it's good to use analysis. It's good to connect to your feelings. And when your heart and small intestine organ function energies are balanced in harmony, then we are able to get the head and the heart working together as a unit. In traditional Chinese medicine, they say the small intestine's function is to separate the pure from the impure. What is good for us and what do we need to discard? It's about judgment, it's about decision making, and it's about clarity. So you can see there's a lot of dovetailing here. And when it's imbalanced, they say that we become prone to scattered thinking. That's what I call the overanalysis and confusion. Okay, now to the lung and large intestine, right? So the lung and large intestine are a coupled organ. As I said earlier, the lining comes from the same embryonic origin. The lung absorbs oxygen and expels waste gases. The large intestine absorbs water and other sort of nutrients, but mainly water actually. And things like bile acids get recycled through the wall of your large intestine, and we eliminate food waste. So they're absorption and elimination stations, which is why they are functionally connected. And the emotion is sadness and deep grief. And the tissue that's governed by the lung and large intestine in Jyutsu is what they call the deep skin. And my understanding of the deep skin is it's not the superficial skin layer, it's the not the epidermis, it's the dermis, and it's not only the dermis, the fascia, and the lymphatic tissue. They're all governed and controlled by this lung large intestine axis. So the large intestine in Jyutsu is about eliminating what no longer serves us. It's about being able to let go physically, emotionally. It's physically, we let go of wastes. Emotionally, we let go of attachments that no longer serve us. And grief, the grief at having to let it go. The grief at having to let go of our youth, for example, the grief of having to let go of the fact that I used to think that this was really good for me and that this was right and that this was the way for me to go. And now it isn't anymore. And so I have to grieve that woman who I think was maybe naive at that stage or was just in a different stage of her life. So it helps us to become adaptable and flexible in being able to let things go. People who have large intestine imbalances often hoard. They often hoard things in their physical environment also, right? Not always, but they often do. So the large intestine is the internal boundary between me and the world. So the food comes into our mouths and then it goes into your gut, right? And then it actually ends up down in your intestine, and that's the boundary. That's your border. What are you letting in and what are you not going to let in? What serves you and what doesn't serve you, right? Do you know who the enemy is? Do you know what's not good for you? Do you know what doesn't serve you? Do you listen to that? Or do you just go, oh, well, these people definitely shouldn't be coming across my border, or these substances shouldn't be coming across my border, but I'm just going to let them in anyway because I couldn't be bothered, all right? Do you know? Are you discerning enough? That's actually that border, that internal boundary. And can you say yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no? Can you be firm in your boundaries? Can you stick to your commitments? I'm not talking about discipline. I'm just saying that, if you say you're going to do something, do you do it? If you don't want to do something, do you say no? Can you stand in your truth? That is part of our boundaries. So when it's imbalanced, we hold, we hoard, we become rigid, and we very often become it's difficult. It's difficult for us. It's difficult for us to forgive. It's difficult for us to let go. It's difficult for us to move on. When it's in harmony, we're open, we're adaptable, and we have the courage to release and let go. It's like we can exhale it. We can let it go. We can grieve it. We can grieve parts of ourselves that we've had to let go. We can grieve the job. We can grieve the marriage. We can grieve the children leaving home. We can grieve the life stage. We can grieve the youth. I can grieve the non-crepey skin. You can grieve that, but you can move beyond it. You don't end up being obsessed by it. So in traditional Chinese medicine, they obviously say the large intestine is about waste elimination, and it also is a fluid. It supports fluid balances because the lung and large intestine supports the bladder and kidney. All right, and in Chinese medicine, they say it works with the lungs to regulate the skin and the protective Wei Qi. And the Wei Qi is essentially our immunity. So, the Chinese knew what they were talking about long before we knew about gut-associated lymphatic tissue. Emotionally, it's obviously our ability to let go. And when it's imbalanced, we have grief that we can't metabolize. They also say we become rigid and we become obsessive. And it's obsessive thinking in terms of how we go over and over and over the thing that wounded us. That's the kind of obsessive thinking that we see when we have a large intestine imbalance. So let's look at some of the sort of underlying unconscious, very often, factors that can cause disease in these organs, the small intestine and the large intestine. Now, please, this is a generalization, okay? When I say in your small intestine problems, you can have a condition which is called small SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You can have upper abdominal bloating. You can have duodenal ulcers. That's in your small intestine, okay? So remember, your small intestine is largely affected by how well your pancreas secretes digestive enzymes and how much bile you're actually putting into your digestive tract, because it's not operating in isolation, right? So even though I'm speaking about these organs as if they're in isolation, they never are working in isolation. They're always connected to one another. So when we have small intestine problems, it very often comes from communication blocks with family, where you felt misunderstood, right? Where and you feel that you have to access your motivation from a place of sort of like anger and instinct. This is the hustling. You got to go harder, right? You've got to push. You've got to drive, it's almost like you've got to access the sort of primitive push through part of yourself in order to actually create what you love, rather than allowing yourself to be open and flexible and adaptable to receiving. So in other words, there's no pain, no pain, no gain. That's a very small intestine kind of issue. Okay. It's like, if I don't struggle, if this is not hard, then I don't deserve it. And so therefore, everything in life that we create comes with a struggle. Now, that struggle activates our sympathetic nervous system, which means we go into sympathetic overdrive, which then really channels this whole stress response and can cause a variety of problems, right? But it can also cause small intestinal issues. You can also be very over analytical and critical, hypercritical, usually of ourselves, can also be of other people, right? More in the head, less in the heart. No feeling, more thinking, rationalizing those emotions away, all right? The head feels disconnected from the body. We live from the neck up rather than actually embodying our lives. So we don't feel our emotions because our emotions are in our body, all right? We rely on the intellect. We rely on logic and reason. We analyze things. It's almost like you live your life by spreadsheets. You've always got a spreadsheet of what you've got to think about. You've got to think about it before you can do anything. Now, I'm not suggesting that thinking about things are bad. It's just, you imagine when this becomes skewed, right? When this becomes your only way of doing, when it starts sucking the joy out of you, then it's an imbalance, okay? What else? Another thing with the small intestine is we believe that we're only allowed to have the leftovers, and that other people, they have the freedom to do whatever they want to do, but we are trapped in our sort of dutiful role, right? So this can be, if you think about societal things like, I don't know, the man is the head of the household and you have to submit to your husband if you're a woman that's married. And so your husband is the authority figure. He gets to do anything he wants to, and you are trapped in the role of being the dutiful wife. And if you break that, you're going to actually get condemned either by, I don't know, your society or your family or your church or whoever it is that has instilled those values in you. Now, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. It's just an example, okay? I'm trapped. Everyone else gets to do what they want to do. I'm trapped being dutiful, and I have to be satisfied with the leftovers because everyone else is doing what they want to do. They get what they want. I have to settle for what I can get. And this then very often leads to rationalizing the negative feelings, that toxic positivity about how much I actually love my life and my whole life looks like Instagram and Facebook, when the truth is that's not how I feel at all. And those kind of underlying issues, most of which are unconscious, remember, can very often lead to problems in the small intestine. So let's talk about the large intestine. So I'm just gonna speak about colon problems in general, and then I'm going to talk about colon cancer because it's one of the more common cancers as well, right? So the colon, when we have colon problems, it's an unconscious ability. It's usually unconscious. It's an inability to let go of a past negative experience. So we think we've moved on. We've bought the t-shirt, we've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, moved on. But the truth is that in the quiet moments or in the early hours of the morning, right, that's where we go back to. And we might not consciously go back to that past hurt, but things that happen in our current reality trigger those past traumas and for us, all right? And so what ends up happening is we end up having an irritation and an anger, which is really the one that's on the surface of the grief. Underneath it is the grief because of the hurt. We've never processed the pain. So we have the irritation and the anger at the past experiences that we didn't have any control over or that we couldn't change. So this is often seen when if you've had a very traumatic childhood, for example, and you're stuck in blaming your parents. Now, please, again, no shame to anyone who's possibly doing this or find themselves in this place, okay? But when you can't get over it, when you can't move beyond that, right? It's very often because there's an imbalance in that large intestine organ function energy. So if you correct the energy imbalance, if you feed yourself well, if you do the physical things, it's not going to negate the trauma. It's not, but it might make you better able to go in and deal with the mental and emotional trauma. Stressing over unresolved issues. Pushing through challenges and circumstances. This is a very common theme with large intestine issues. Pushing through difficulties and challenges on your own, not asking for help because of what you think the person's going to ask for in return. Because in your mind, and this is possibly based on past perception, is that when you wanted help, whoever gave you the help then used it as leverage to get something from you. So you associate help with control, and because you don't want to be controlled, you don't actually get the help, and you rather just soldier on your own. Okay, and so you're frightened of messing up. You don't want to mess up because you don't want to be overtly controlled. So yeah, you keep it in. You keep it in. You don't process it. You don't verbalize it. And what then happens is it festers. It literally, it's like a festering sore. It just, and over time, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So colon cancer is just a more sort of extreme version of what I've just spoken about. So colon cancer very often happens when you have a perception that in the past, right, you've been bullied by an authority, someone that's made you feel stupid, someone that's made you feel inadequate. You may be targeted by influential people who you think are influential, authority figures, right? Can be a parent, can be a teacher, who prey on your vulnerabilities. They feed on your vulnerabilities and they make you feel small. And then what happens is you don't actually want to take any kind of risks because you've possibly been blamed in such a way that you don't want to make mistakes. So what also happens with this, and I'm thinking of a patient now that I knew, right? So I had a patient who she was happily married. I don't know, she was possibly in like her midlife. This was the story she was telling me. I only saw her when she was much older. And her husband was on blood pressure medication. So the sort of old school blood pressure medications, one of the common side effects was impotence. And that the doctors obviously didn't warn the men about. And so her husband, because he was on this blood pressure medication, became impotent, and he blamed it on her. In other words, he felt embarrassed and ashamed about his sexual inadequacy, that he saw as his sexual inadequacy, and he not in so many words, but she felt like she was inadequate. If she had just been a better wife, if she was more sexually attractive. Now you can see that could be a massive wound, right? And so they stayed married. But what happened with this woman is she attracted bosses who also, so she was very well qualified, very intelligent, very good at her job, and somehow ended up working for like petty-minded little men with too much power who then also lorded it over her, right? And so this was a continuation of the pattern. And by the time I saw her, she had the bowel cancer. So it's the unfairness. It's being blamed for something that isn't really your fault. And it's like being gaslit. If you get gaslit enough, I suppose, right, it creates this wound where, first of all, you don't want to ask anyone for help. You don't want to share it with anyone. And you try and be better so that you can avoid making mistakes, so that you can avoid having this happen to you again. But inadvertently, because of your vulnerability, you end up in situations where you potentially, that vulnerability is exploited by others. And this creates this festering, it's unfair. How can this happen? Why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. This is so unfair. And so again, if that's never metabolized, and listen, this feeds into whatever your underlying limiting belief about yourself is, because it essentially confirms that what you unconsciously believe to be true about yourself is actually true. And so that takes us right back to, I don't know, episode 2 or 3, where we spoke about limiting beliefs. So this is one of the ways. So please, everybody who's ever had colon cancer, you may not have had any of these issues, giving you these little sort of insights. It's just like a taster, because every human is unique. It's like you've got a unique fingerprint. There isn't another human like you on earth, and there will never be another human exactly like you on earth. And so your disease is also not going to be exactly like everyone else's. So even though 10 people can have the same kind of colon cancer. They're going to have a different story about what actually was going on underneath. All right. But this is just an indicator, so that I'm trying to paint this picture for you that you cannot look at only one thing in isolation. It is always all of it together. So yes, our physical health matters. It matters what you feed yourself. It matters what medications you take, or that you know that your medication might be disrupting your gut biome so that you can compensate for that somehow, right? It matters what we think. It matters what we put inside, and it will determine what gets absorbed. It also matters where we put ourselves in the world. What is the job you've put yourself in? What is the friend circle you've put yourself in? What family are you staying bonded to that might actually not be serving you? So, what is necessary? What is good for me? Most people don't even know what is good for them and what isn't. And so all of those factors, they work together to create an entire human, and they create a dynamic situation that very often our body results. What happens is our body then develops signs and symptoms. We potentially get a disease label that helps us. It helps us to wake up to the truth, to show us what are the missing links that we haven't been looking at, not to punish us, just to show us, show us. So I hope that you found this episode enlightening. I love to hear your comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment. If you found this useful, please will you share the link directly with your friends and family. And thanks once again for listening to another episode of The Missing Link in Your Healing. See you on the next one.